So I hope we will have a really fruitful, meaningful time together. Let me also share some little history about the series itself. We call it Mind Matters. It has a double meaning. Mind is an important topic. That's why it matters to all of us. But also, we at Mind and Life Europe favor an embodied concept of the mind, that the mind is an embodied feature of our existence as developed by one of our founders, Francisco Varela. So the title of the series also reflects that. This series is open to the public. This is now the third event. First, we had Roche Joan Halifax in August 2020. Then the second event was with Richard Davidson in November 2020 with the title Wellbeing is a Skill. And today it's a privilege to have the third such public talk with Matthieu Ricard with the title A Plea for All-Inclusive Altruism. And I would like to introduce Matthieu to you all. Matthieu is an honorary board member of Mind and Life Europe, also a founder of Karuna Shechen. He's a Buddhist monk at Shechen Monastery in Nepal. He received a PhD in cellular genetics at the Institut Pasteur in France under Nobel laureate Francois Jacob. He has lived in Himalayas since 1972, studying with Kangyu Rinpoche and Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, two respected Tibetan spiritual masters. Since 1989, he has served as French interpreter for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He's the author of The Monk and the Philosopher, The Quantum and the Lotus, Happiness, a guide to developing life's most important skill, and Altruism, the power of compassion to change yourself and the world. With several books from Tibetan, including The Life of Shabkar and The Heart of Compassion. He donates all the proceeds from his books and much of his time to 140 humanitarian projects in Tibet, Nepal, and India through his charitable association, Karuna Shechen. Thank you, Matthieu, for joining us today. May I ask you to lead us to a minute of silence that we would have together before listening to you so that we can enter in the right spirit, in the right mindset to your speech. Thank you so much in advance.
Thank you so much, Gabor. Thank you, all our friends at Mind and Life Europe. So yes, silence is the matrix of every word. It's kind of the symbol of our emptiness from which everything is born. So, but we need to fill that emptiness and this silence with something like a rainbow filling up a sky, or the sound of the thunder dragon filling a space. And I think the best when we embark in anything like this meeting today or any action is to fill it with unconditional benevolence. So let your mind rest in this natural simplicity of the open presence. And within that space, let it completely filled with benevolence. And then let's keep silence so it has time to permeate our whole being. Thank you. So then should I proceed? Are you sure? Okay. So it's wonderful to be reunited with the Mind and Life Europe family. kind of one of the oldies. I joined Mind and Life in 2000, even though I knew Francisco Varela and Daniel Goleman much before that. But it dragged me in this wonderful adventure in year 2000 with the destructive emotion meeting. And until recently, I was a very faithful participant. Now getting old, so the call of the forest and the hermitage has come back. So I'm less happy. And I'm so happy also of the different development of flourishing of Mind and Life Europe and Mind and Life at large. So yes, it's a very important subject in our times. You know, it's very tempting in the time of crisis to resort to sort of fall upon oneself, try to find a cocoon of safety. And so we might fear the rise of further exasperation of individualism and everyone for themselves and things like that. Although we know from history and from studies that when it comes to major upheavals and catastrophes, like natural catastrophes, such as the Katrina storm and earthquakes, and even the London subway bomb attack and so forth, that despite all the image of everyone running and occasionally people looting one or two shops to get water for their kids or something, overall, those crises trigger extraordinary sort of drive towards helping each other. In the earthquake situation, always it's the neighborhood who help each other much before the help comes from authorities, from anyone else. So, in fact, in those situations of emergency, it is the good part of human being that comes at the surface, which is very, very, of course, reassuring. But it tells you little more than that. It tells you that actually, somehow, this is what is at the very depth of ourselves. And even though we can be psychopaths, we can commit mass murder and genocide. But if you look at all the studies carried out the last 20 years or so with very young children, the predisposition is much more toward cooperation, altruism, rather than competition and everything for themselves. It's very clear. All the studies of Tomasello and Warneken with very young infants show the preference for that. Almost 90% prefer altruistic people, cooperate almost unconditionally. And so, although as a social animal, this is understandable rather than the opposite. And so, of course, we can go to the other extreme, but at least we start with a good predisposition. Now, of course, this is not enough because we know so many challenges. So, but at least the potential is there, which is wonderful. And also studies like those carried for almost 30 years by Daniel Batson and his team at the Kansas University to show that genuine altruism does exist. It may seem obvious to many of us, but it was certainly not to most of the field of experimental psychology in the first half of the 20th century, certainly not in economy, and certainly not about many Western philosophers that took for granted that if you scratch, if you dig well enough in the human motivation, you'll always find a selfish reason for a seemingly altruistic behavior. So that was the kind of theory of universal selfishness, or it's called psychological egoism. This has been first completely refuted by philosophers as armchair science because there's no evidence to back it up and it's full with logical flaws. And then Daniel Batson, over 35 kinds of different experimental, very clever experimental procedure could sort of put in evidence the motivation behind some behavior where you had the choice to behave in altruistic or selfish way. So it's not that we are all altruistic at all times, far from that, but the very fact that we can behave in altruistic way, which means that our main goal and motivation is someone else, not as it mean to further benefit oneself in a bigger way or whatever, to get good reputation, not to feel guilt or a sense of duty, pure wish to do something good to others or to relieve suffering. So that's a good start, because if it was not the case, if we didn't have somehow this kind of basic goodness, it's useless to try to teach, cooperation altruism at school or to make a more altruistic society. It's like trying to take a piece of charcoal and you try to polish it for 100 years, it's not going to shine like gold. But if it's gold that has fallen in the mud, you just pick it up and make it shine. Potential is there. So that's very good news. And the other good news, besides the 2,000 years of contemplative experience trying to cultivate those qualities, is that more recently, let's say over the last 20 years mostly, all the studies in neuroscience also have it's a big paradigm shift. Before that, it was thought that the brain is so complex that when it has reached maturity, say by the age of 20 or so, if we start, it will be making a huge mess if we start changing things, because it's such unbelievably the most complex structure of the universe in such a small space. So the idea that we could change was very foreign to at that time. But now we know it's not true. So one of the big change is the brain is plastic. It can change up to our death, of course, maybe at different speeds. There are windows of opportunity for certain skills, like mastering different languages and so forth, which are easier, say, before you are 5 years old. But in terms of changing the brain, it changes it throughout our lives. So now, how are you going to influence that change? Or you could just learn how to juggle, to play chess, or just to learn how to read and write and sing and all kinds of things. Or you could learn also to become a cold-blood killer. That also will change your brain if you do it a few times, definitely. But now it has been clearly shown that we can cultivate certain basic human qualities like attention, resilience, inner freedom, sort of emotional balance, and altruism and compassion. So that's, again, very important because it shows that we can change as individuals. And then epigenetics has shown that if you do change, you may also change the expression of your genes. And then the evolution of culture studies have shown that even though you don't get new genes, you don't get an altruistic gene, that might take 50,000 years. We don't have time for that, especially for the climate crisis. But over a generation or two, culture can change. So individual change culture would then change the next generation, and they sort of fashion each other like two blades of a knife sharpening each other. So we are in position to actually make a more altruistic society. All the elements are there, it is a potential. Now, why is it important and why it needs to be all inclusive? First of all, if you look at the challenges of our times, clearly one of the main ones is we are caught into a very difficult position in reconciling the immediate needs. It's not just in a developed country, but a mother in Africa that just need to feed their family or kids for the next day. And the environment in 50 years, that's not a sort of dramatic concern of the day. So our immediate needs, and then if you look at other end of the spectrum, at the stock market, we change every 5 seconds. So it's all the immediate sort of change, wanting to have a balance sheet at the end of the month, so the fast speed of the economy and so forth. So the short term. So there are some needs for that. We need to remedy to poverty in the midst of plenty. We need to make sure that people don't suffer from hunger, that children can go to school. So all that is more immediate needs. Then there's the midterm. How do you flourish in life over a lifetime, over a generation, over a career, a family? And then it comes to structure, institution that should provide the condition so that they should not tell you how to be happy and how to be altruistic, but they should provide the condition that you can thrive and you can cooperate safely without being all the time the victims of the free riders and the reckless people who want to exploit you. So that's the midterm. Now there's a new factor that was not a challenge until recently, because 10,000 years ago, human beings were, around 5 million on Earth, no big deal. Although they already had wiped out most of the big species wherever they were, but still, the impact on the environment was not so large. Now we are 7 billion, and gradually we become the major agent entering the Anthropocene to shape the future of the planet and the biodiversity. And we know that for sure now. There's no question about that. So that's probably the biggest challenge of the 21st century. And even if you look at immediate challenges like the present pandemic, if you look carefully, it's stunning that all the viral epidemics for the last 20 years all came from unhealthy relation to other species. Ebola, AIDS, they all came from interacting with wild species. Same with probably with the COVID. And then you have the swine flu, the avian flu, and the SARS. They all were sort of wrong way of, industrial farming and completely unnatural way of having thousands and thousands of animals packed and so forth. So it shows that we put incredible stress on natural life, incredible stress on the planet. So that's the long term, and that's difficult because it's very hard to really be motivated emotionally for something that might happen in 30 years, and even less when it's next century, because we won't be there. Even your grandchildren will be there. So you may easily say, why, it's not why should I care? Which some people say, because they have no consideration for future generation. Now, the drama is if you put some social workers, economists, politicians, activists, and scientists, politicians in the same room, trying, say, people of goodwill, let's assume, to try to build a better future. But it's like a schizophrenic dialogue because they're not speaking on the same time scale. So we need a concept that is pragmatic and unifying so that we can work together. And I really, it's not too short of show off, but I spent 5 years researching the concept of, consideration of others and altruism. And there's really no other concept than having more consideration for others, which can sort of be the thread, the Ariane thread that reconnect those three considerations. If we have more consideration for others, now we will take care of poverty in the midst of plenty. We'll have a caring economics that is a service of society and not the opposite. If we have more consideration for others, we'll let people flourish in life, provide all the conditions in the workplace, everything that we can imagine to have people give them a better life. And then, of course, if we consideration for future generation and other species, then we will not, be a treason to future generation as, it has been, the young people say now, you are just traitors. How you dare, Greta Thunberg said at the UN, how you dare, not do anything while we're sacrificing all the generations to come. So if we do have more consideration for others, then all those things fall in places. So now, you see, that's why it's so important, because we know we have this potential. We know that potential can be enhanced. And you heard many of you, Richard Davidson, saying all those can be cultivated as skills, not only well-being, but attention, altruism, compassion. One of the main study I participated at the Richard Davidson's lab with Antoine Lutz was precisely about what happens in the brain when we engage in unconditional compassion meditation. And that's the one that gave this well-known increase of gamma waves that were of a magnitude that were not previously recorded in neuroscience. So that was not with trying to meditate on happiness, but that was meditate on compassion, altruism. That was the most powerful of all positive emotions. So the potential is there. So it's a very pragmatic answer. And then it has to be all inclusive. It's not like you altruistic with people you love. In evolution, it was a big challenge to explain why altruism should be good in evolution. Darwin sort of scratched his head and he said that's one of the biggest challenges. But he also knew already that cooperation and behaving well in the community was a key factor. Yet, later on, this idea of inclusive fitness, that you have to calculate how much of your genes you give to your offspring, became predominant. And that's been mostly put aside. And now work like Martin Novak at Harvard has shown that cooperation has been much more creative throughout evolution to progress to increasingly complex level of complexity among species. So clearly there's the potential and the need. So therefore, we need to be inclusive. It has to be for all sentient beings. Why not? It's like it doesn't cost much, because it's not like you have to distribute a chocolate cake and you just have a small amount. This is an attitude. This is a kind of state of mind that you don't a priori exclude anyone from your benevolence. Why not? Why should you exclude people? Nobody wants to suffer. And even bloody dictators, you can certainly make the wish, may that person, the hatred, the indifference, the cruelty that is in that person's mind, may that be eradicated. That's an altruistic wish. So you can apply that. You don't have to exclude them and wish to smash them to nothing. So it has to be inclusive. And it's just a matter of an attitude. You don't have to do it. You cannot do it realistically to everyone. Then it has to be also inclusive of other sentient beings, because sentience is not the prerogative of human beings. Of course, we are the smartest in a way. I mean, we don't know very much how a whale or a dolphin thinks, but even they have a bigger brain that compared to our body weight, but we have no idea. But at least certainly they have a consciousness. Even Caladian crows can fashion tools, use them in a way that they don't use in nature, in the lab, have very ingenious solutions. So the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness that was adopted by many preeminent scientists said that consciousness first is present in other species, and then can also happen in different evolutionary pathway. Like birds don't have a prefrontal cortex, yet you can train parrots to distinguish a Picasso from a Rembrandt by giving them sweets, and they don't make any mistake. So things like that. And bonobos can be faster at mental calculation than young graduate students. So now once you know that, so you cannot just count them for nothing. We are everything, they are nothing, and use them as instruments as if they were at our disposal. So we must see them as a co-citizen in this world, the 8 million other species. So that's really all inclusive, because we cannot sort of build up on our happiness on the suffering and death, unnecessary suffering of many other species. If you ask anyone, are you in favor of justice and morality? No, hardly anyone says no. I mean, I asked the question once in a conference, and one person raised their hand, but she didn't get the question. So everyone is in favor of justice and morality. And then if you ask, is it moral and just to inflict unnecessary suffering to any sentient being? And people say no. Well, most of the suffering we are inflicting on other species today are not necessary, so they are unjust. So to give you a quick idea, we evaluate the number of Homo sapiens that ever lived on Earth. Now, guess what? It's not that big, because as I mentioned, we were 5 million 10,000 years ago. It's just about something around 120 billion, not much. Well, guess what also? This is the number of other species that we kill every 2 months, year round, as if nothing happened. So there's clearly also an ethical problem there. And if we want to have a sustainable harmony, not just sustainable development, that means sustainable harmony means to sustain a harmonious society by remedying to poverty in the midst of plenty, for now, and in the future is to remain in sustainable harmony with the environment. We know today by August, we already exhausted the renewable resources of Earth. So we are living on borrowed credit, and not for long, because we don't have 3 planets. And so therefore, we simply cannot go on like that. So the pandemic is just a sign of some much greater suffering coming to the climate change. When you get 250 million climate refugees, not going to be the same thing. Many more pandemics can and will happen if you don't do anything because of climate change. The cycle of the malaria parasites can be cut by half if there's 3-4 degrees more of warming. So plenty of things like that. So it is time, with consideration for others, with really seeing the big picture, with not wasting time, everybody says that, that we take our destiny in our hands in a meaningful way, in a compassionate way, in an altruistic way. And although there are solutions, scientists tell us there are, but they keep on saying that because it is true, but doesn't mean that it's easy. It needs measured changes. So are we ready to do it? So one lesson I got from this recent pandemic is at least states and government can take very drastic measures, and at least for some time, the population is ready to follow. So imagine that 1/3 of that determination is put at the service of what is necessary to fight climate change. There we'll get somewhere. So as you can see, altruism is not just a noble, utopian, naive, sweet idea, a luxury that you can afford when everything goes well, or some blah blah that some nice Buddhist monk, or I don't know nice, but anyway, a Buddhist monk coming down from his hermitage tried to share with his friends. It is the only pragmatic concept that can help us address our challenges. So I hope that we all agree. I'm not sure it would make a big difference, but I hope somehow, we have a Buddhist saying that drop by drop, a big vessel finally filled. So it is a small drop, and I hope it's a little bit useful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthieu, for your introduction on the topic. We are receiving great questions here already, several types, more philosophical ones, more concrete ones. So I will start probably with the philosophical types. And then we can go into more practical questions concerning our experience with the pandemic or history that we also received here.
Yeah.
The first question I would like to raise then is from Sophie Bochtler, if I pronounce her name well. I believe the step before altruism and compassion needs to be compassion to oneself. I feel that before you can care about the other, in parentheses, you need to be in tune with yourself first. And in that order, I would add as next step a more sustainable lifestyle. So put simply, self-altruism sustainability. What do you think, Matthieu?
Yeah. Well, it's a very practical and experimental question, therapeutic question, more than maybe philosophical. Mm-hmm. Well, in the very beginning, I must confess that I was a bit put off by this self-compassion thing when I first discovered it, because I thought, hey, here's the individualistic West taking hold of Buddhist compassion and putting back into the individualistic system. I was completely wrong, definitely. Then I became very close friend with Paul Gilbert and Christine Neff. And first of all, I understood that there was nothing to do with boosting self-esteem like crazy and a fabrication of the epidemic, the narcissistic epidemic, which happens in the United States, and self-esteem, the way it's taught, say in North America by, you are a little princess, I'm the top, we are the best ever, and so forth. It leads just to narcissism. So then I understood that when you are, and also when the first some psychologist told the dilemma about self-hate, he turned to his translator. He said, "What did he say?" And then after he said, "It's impossible." And psychologists said, "Yes, unfortunately, it happens." He said, "No, you can't." And so then they had a misunderstanding because they were not speaking at the same level. So then it was explained that people practice self-harm, that they have they have self-contempt, and et cetera. So then he also thought that maybe you have been too demanding on yourself. Anyway, they start to explore things. And gradually, after meeting those great therapists and psychologists, I could easily make the relation with the Buddhist concepts. So in fact, self-compassion doesn't lead to increase in narcissism. It is actually a healthy way to relate with what you are, not demanding too much or being too sort of wanting that you always perform perfectly at the best, is to also see that there are so many human beings maybe in the same position that yourself. And so then from then on, you can build up and then start to look, for compassion for others. But Paul Gilbert also told me that if someone was in deep in sort of self-hate and so forth and contempt for themselves, if you ask them to be compassionate to others, it's just like a huge burden and they just can't relate with that. It's oppressing. So then I thought, what is the equivalent in Buddhism? I said, well, after all, in all the teaching is said, if you look deep, deep within yourself, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day and my whole life. Even people who do self-harm, they all say it's kind of relief. So somehow they find a relief in their torment. It's not to suffer more, they find some kind of relief. So, and Paul Gilbert said, one day, people who have self-hate, they identify, even they say happiness not for me has been denied all my life. If they identify that somewhere deep within, it will be better if I was not suffering. It would be better. So to recognize that if it was at all possible, even though I think it's impossible, but that would be nice. From that on, say, okay, if I identify that aspiration, then how to proceed? What is the next step? I get concerned by that. So then there are things to do and things to avoid, possibly. So once you have identified that, and even you'll be messed up and complete confusion, then soon you become aware that deep, deep within others, they might be also completely confused and addicted to the cause of suffering and turn their back to happiness, yet somehow deep within, they don't want to suffer. Then you start to see this interdependence, this common aspiration, common humanity. So even in Buddhist teaching, we start to say, just as I don't want to suffer, and I want to thrive and be happy, so do all sentient beings. And then from what we will call the Buddhist version of self-compassion, which is probably not very different, then you can easily open yourself to compassion for others. So yes, I fully agree, but nevertheless, we should not stop there. It's just the first step.
Thank you, Matthieu. Another question, Lawrence de Groot asks, can our consideration for other be sustained in a materialistic worldview, or do we need a paradigm shift towards objective idealism so that we can cultivate more oneness needed for altruism?
I think, you see, probably we need to, I think it's easier in this world to remain very pragmatic. So the pursuit of selfish happiness is bound to fail. That's almost a scientific statement. That doesn't work. And it doesn't work for many reasons. So very briefly, first of all, subjectively, me, in the very narrow, it's very stuffy in the bubble of selfishness. It's just you. And the rest of the world is somehow become an instrument to your goals or a threat to your so-called preferences. So it's a very, very uncomfortable. You make your life miserable and you also make it miserable to everyone. So it's a lose-lose situation. That's a subjective experience. Now, in terms of relation to reality, if we were, like this snooker balls, sometime interacting, but basically solid, independent structure, well, we could build our happiness in our little bubble, and say, okay, I have nothing against others' happiness, but it's not my job. It's easy, because you don't have to care for billion being happiness. You just build your own and they do it and everyone is happy. That's suppose that we are like snooker balls, independent, autonomous. We are not. We are as interdependent as it can be. There's nothing in us that is not interdependent. Everything. You buy those mugs in the holiday on the seashore, what is you find with your name on it. But really what you should write in tiny letters all around is others. So many people got involved into making that mug. So this is ridiculous, the idea we're a separate entity. It doesn't work, so it's bound to fail. It's completely dysfunctional. Now, if you look at the twofold accomplishment, others' good and your own good at the same time, what happens? First of all, everyone agrees from positive psychology, like Barbara Fredrickson says, the supreme emotion, love, is the one that comes with the biggest array of other positive emotions together, that widens your mind. So by all positive emotion, that's the one that has the biggest sort of change effect. Neuroscience, again, I mentioned that from all the different meditative states, the one that has the strongest change, self-induced change in the brain is meditation on compassion, not on anything else. So, and it is one of the most positive and wholesome state of mind. So it's very rewarding, although that's not the goal. It's rewarding because it's others-oriented. It's rewarding because it's all-inclusive. It's rewarding because it's linked with the very constructive, positive emotion of all, which is love and compassion. So then it's a win-win situation. An altruistic, of course, carries the good of others. And as a bonus, you know, like when you make the crop for the wheat, you also get the straw. It's not for that you do it, but you get as a bonus. So you become also happy as a bonus, not the warm glow. It's just an added, it's a secondary effect. You don't do it for that, but you get it along. Now, if you think I'm going to be altruistic, though I don't care because I get the warm glow, that's what I want, it's not going to work. Now, if you give $2 to a beggar saying, I don't care, but I'm going to feel good, and you wait, you are not going to feel good because you only feel good if you are genuinely altruistic. So therefore, it's a win-win situation. Now, in terms of the second aspect about being realistic. Now, compassion and loving kindness and altruistic love is basically based on the recognition of interdependence, because if just we recognize that basically every sentient being wants to thrive in life, save its life, even animals, you know, whether we are a university professor or a goat, nobody likes to have a knife stab in your stomach. It doesn't make difference whether you are a university professor or a pig or whatever. It's the same. So in a way, to recognize that common humanity and common sentience with other species, that's the foundation for altruism and compassion. Therefore, it is functional. So it works. So that's the only way to proceed forward.
Thank you, Matthieu. There is another short question. How can we tell whether an action is born out of altruism and not egoism? It's asked by, how can we tell whether an action is born out of altruism and not egoism? And so, it's a question by David Farrell.
Okay, so many, you know, when you look at the definition of happiness, there are some remarkable researchers like Christine Monroe, who studied the rescuers of the Jews during the Second World War, an extraordinary act of heroic altruism over a long time at great risk and so forth. And she found that, you know, they came from different kind of backgrounds. Some were very rich, you know, landlords, some were poor shopkeepers, and some were religious, some not. The common idea was a sense of common humanity with everyone. How can I close my door to this person who is seeking refuge and not protect them? So, but she defined altruism as action and at the cost of taking a risk. But, you know, this is very nice. I mean, their studies are wonderful, very inspiring. She wrote a book called, I forgot by the name, but The Heart of Altruism. But yet, if you look at the, you know, the work of Daniel Batson and also Buddhist position, you cannot judge just simply by a behavior, because there's so many behavior which are facsimile of altruism, which were actually motivated by selfishness. Of course, we know we could be so kind to a rich old lady for a few years, hoping to get her heritage. No, that's clearly not altruistic, even though you did good. But for what? What is the motivation? So you can call that altruism. You just call them beneficial behavior, but that's something else. So we needed to go to the motivation. And that's why Daniel Batson said altruism is a motivation. And the Dalai Lama says exactly the same thing. And also, if you really want to help someone or to benefit someone, and then you get some obstacles, you cannot do it for some reason, even you are ready to do it. So that doesn't mean that your motivation was not altruistic. So the motivation is the one that colors your action. So therefore, it's easier because also it's very hard to predict the outcome of our action on the long term. So we need discernment. So altruism needs to be combined with discernment and wisdom, because otherwise, as we say, hell is paved with good intention. And so you need wisdom, but basically altruism starts with motivation. So now how can we check? Well, I remember oral teaching from the Dalai Lama. That's quite simple, and I think it tells everything. First, we need to check, I'm doing that chiefly for myself or chiefly for others. Okay, chiefly for myself, well, not necessarily bad, but it's self-centered. No, there's nothing wrong to wish yourself good. It's not that, but it should not be at the cost of others' suffering, of course. So is it chiefly for myself or chiefly for others? I'll say, okay, it's chiefly for others. So we start to be on the path of empathic concern or altruism, whatever you call. Now, is it for the small number or greater number? Of course, better if it's the greater number. And now, is it for the short term or for the long term? So again, it's better to be for the greater number and for the long term and for the benefit of others. So he added, you should think and think and think. So that's the only thing you can do. Use the mirror of your own mind to check again and again and again and again your motivation and intention and the quality of your intention. That you can do. And then you do the best you can according to your capacity. But you cannot, forebode future. You cannot see the whole chain of consequences, but you can do your very best to try to do what looks to be the most beneficial to others. So that's the way.
Thank you, Matthieu. There are some more concrete questions with regards to specific areas of application, if I may use that word. One is by Donna Estes. She asked the same question twice in the chat, but I would read the second version. How to confront and change anti-Semitism and racism and hate? What should be done? Should the US have what South Africa had, truth and reconciliation in regard to genocide of Native Americans, Blacks, and current anti-Semitism and racism? How to deal with racism?
Well, that's a big question, about the Native American. I'm amazed that there's still no recognition of that genocide. It's unbelievable. I mean, our great founding fathers, what do they do? Wow, it's frightening. Anyway, now how to combat racism? That's probably, in general, anti-Semitism in particular. Well, one of the key points or factor for altruism is valuing others. That's what leads you to be concerned by others. If you're not valuing others, then why should you be concerned? You can use them as instruments. You'll be indifferent to their fate. So valuing others is a key factor of altruism. If you value others, you are concerned by others, then comes the idea, okay, if I'm concerned by others, what will harm them? What will benefit them? Then everything follows. And now if you look at all small or large, dramatic or less dramatic discrimination, suffering inflicted on others, from just a small, unpleasant words to genocide. It all started with increasingly devaluing others. That's clear. Every dictator, whether it's about the Jewish people or the Gypsies or anybody, or even Gaddafi in his own place would treat his enemy as rats, as gnats, as pests. And you see the devaluation, they dehumanize humans and make them animals. So that's the first step, because then it's easy to say they are enemies of humanity, they are dangerous, and so forth and so forth. Therefore, as a whole, we should eliminate them. So then instead of names or individuals, they become numbers, and then it becomes easy to have wholesale elimination. Just to mention also, we do the same with animals. Instead of we dehumanize people as animals, treating them as pests and rats and so forth. But we reify animals, saying they are sausage machines. So basically, the process is just going on the same line, and then we again sort of again and again raise them to kill them around. So because then we have no feelings if they are just sausage machine. So that's open the door to all persecution, to all form of discrimination, and all form of racism. So if you basically value a human being fully, so then there's no way to be racist, spacist, anti-Semitic, or anything. You just have a great care and attention to every sentient being. And in Buddhism, it's all the more easy because everyone has the Buddha nature. So how can you have any sort of diminishing idea about some other beings? So I think this is so important to cultivate that deep respect by seeing our common humanities, that we all are fundamentally same. We have this deep aspiration not to suffer. So recognize that and caring for that. So that's the best way, I think, to close the door. And then recognize the past mistakes, of course, done, but not necessarily by us, but at least apologize, recognize. Not making great again a place that has been not so great to start with, So just recognize that and apologize. Ask for forgiveness, even if it's not enough, but at least it helps not to start all over again.
Thank you, Matthieu. I'm seeing roughly 5-6 more questions, and hopefully we will be able to read them all. I would like to ask Marieke van Vogt to ask her question personally.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I was wondering, on a very practical level, when you think about altruism, it's very logical if you really think through, and yet we often don't act according to that. And especially, it's often difficult to put it in practice in a competitive environment. So, for example, academia, where your job security may be in danger if you're not strong enough in the competition. Or at least there are many, we continuously get, consciously or subconsciously, the message that sort of altruism is not relevant or not even a good thing. So how can you deal with this?
Hi, Marieke, nice to see you. So yes, but I think it's a preconceived idea. Because if you look at studies, say in economic games like Ernst Fair, you saw that people are very much inclined to cooperate. Simply, they are afraid of free riders. Because when free riders take over, then nobody wants to cooperate because they are going to take the blanket for themselves. So you have to set a situation where people who are naturally more ready to cooperate, that was about 70% of the subjects, can do safely. So that's why we cannot be just completely deregulated everywhere. You have to have safeguards so that the majority of people who are, I like the concept of the banality of goodness. Anna Arendt had the banality of evil, but I believe more in the banality of goodness, because most of the time, most of 7 billion human beings behave decently to each other. So, but that's we don't see because that doesn't make big noise. And then there's all the studies of, the tit-tat game. And you say Axel Rode and all that. So you do, if someone cheats you, you punish once, but then you cooperate. And that was the best strategy. Until Martin Nowak did that over a long time with 1,000 students, and he actually found something different. He found that those who keep on cooperating no matter what, staunch cooperators, at the end, they were all at the top, because in a way, it establishes a different relationship. People know like this guy, no matter what, is going to cooperate, is not pretending, we can trust. So gradually they are like a magnet. People go toward people who are trustable, they feel safe. So the more there are those, and also the good thing is that altruistic people naturally train to coalesce or to cooperate because they want to achieve something together. So selfish people, they kick each other's leg all day long. So they are not a group, they are just a collection of individualistic, selfish individuals. Now, a group of altruists who cooperate, of course, they have as a, you may argue about the value of group selection, but clearly a group of altruistic who work together is better off, against a group of selfish people who are each fighting each other on top of fighting the altruistic group. So I think altogether, even from studies, it seems to be the best strategy. And at least you keep your own dignity. You don't fall in the trap of hatred, selfishness, discrimination, racism, and so forth. And in the best case, you help to be a catalyst to transform others. And it seems that throughout history, cooperation somehow has been always more productive. This is the other law of the jungle. And we sort of ignore it because somehow, it looks more like an action movie to speak about violence and competition. But in reality, a big city would not work at all. It would fall apart if we were not cooperating. We don't see that because, again, it's not like big news, like killing someone or doing terrible things.
Thank you, Matthieu.
Be confident.
Thank you for your very clear answer and very encouraging answer. I see some more questions coming in, but I would like to reflect on our current situation a little bit with the pandemic. There were several questions raised with regards to that. Hal Musazlioglu and Jenny Kwan asked questions, and also Carolina Puerta. So let me just read the essence from those questions, which is Hal's questions related to long COVID, constant brain fog, very low body energies, an inability to concentrate, cannot meditate anymore. Is there any findings in neuroscience or experience among professional experienced meditators in this? And Jenny's question with regards to the pandemic relates to how to deal with grief and move from focusing on helping others when you suffer a close bereavement during the pandemic and lockdowns, and maybe loss of people. Mm-hmm. And the third one, just in the same realm, is any tip for dealing with discouragement when realizing the perfect storm we are facing today in our societies as a whole? That was Carolina Puerta's question.
Yes, so of course, we should not underestimate the suffering that many people have endured. First, themselves, their life being threatened and losing loved ones and not being able even to see them for the last few months of their life. That's absolutely heart-rending. And it happened many times. I know many friends who could not see their parents dying because they were not able to visit them for the last 2 months. So that's really incredibly difficult. And also a lot of students in France were being left in a very small room for almost a year now, not being able to see their friends and all that. So they see they can't, even if it's a workplace, they can't work anymore because it's like too stuffy mentally and so forth. So there is an increase of suicide and all that. Yes, that's a tragedy. But also if you think over it, in the beginning, I was surprised, I was in Nepal in my hermitage, but some French journalists managed to find me through the phone and all that. And all the questions were resolving about the challenge of being just left alone with oneself. And, of course, you should not be arrogant, but it was kind of surprising that, adult people who are those, like students and all that, they are already literate, and adult people, they have some culture. So they find so disoriented. And it seems that the tools for dealing with just being with one's own mind is not part of the panoply of tools that is taught in education, for instance. And so, of course, for me, I'm a kind of professional lockdown guy, spending years in hermitage. I love that. So, of course, me, it's not a problem, but that's why I was even more feeling sad and sorry for when this happened. So first of all, we should rekindle some kind of wonderment, just the fact to breathe. And the world is still there. Nature, some people have been, isolated in nature. I participated in a virtual conference by the UN on biodiversity, and the virtual audience at the end said that those who were in nature during their confinement, they found an incredible reconnection with nature. Of course, many people didn't have this good fortune to be near nature. But at least, since this is not going to last forever, obviously, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. If we could take the lesson of how much value we should put on quality of human relationship, cultivate them, cherish that, increase that, just to be with loved ones. Then also to learn how to be with your own mind. Find wonderment also within yourself, just to be alive. It's wonderful, to breathe in again after breathing out. So wonderful. And the freshness of the present moment. So we can find that, it is possible. And then also wonderment again for nature, the beauty, the harmony of nature, to be more sort of appreciating that natural beauty than we casually looked at it before. So I think since we are going to come out of this crisis, no question. So now it's almost like people came out of near-death experience. I mean, all proportion kept. They see life in a different way. So why don't we see life by appreciating more quiet time with ourselves and our dear ones, appreciating more the value of love to one's kin and love to others and humanity and other species, appreciating more the beauty and wonderment of nature and try to preserve it. So if we could come out with this kind of aspiration and lessons, and if that sort of change of mind could reach a critical mass, that it become a little bit more predominant force in society, then I think we could easily take the measures that naturally follow to reduce this crazy consumption that makes that, say, a US citizen emits 200 times more CO2 than a Zambian and 2,000 more times than an Afghan, something like that. This is crazy. This is completely ridiculous. So like that, I think there are many, many lessons. And of course, for those who are in bereavement, well, suffering is part of life. So it's very sad. At the same time, we should do something constructive and beautiful in homage to those who are no more in this world, instead of grieving forever. If they could see us, imagine, they would not wish to see us desperate for the rest of our life. They would hope that we could continue to flourish, to do good things for oneself, for others. So try to build up something constructive and paying homage to those who departed this world.
Thank you, Matthieu. Now it's 4 o'clock Central European time, and I'm just checking this with you, Matthieu, whether you still have a little more time for 2 or 3 more questions, so that all the questions would be answered, which would be a miracle, I think, that we have posed many questions, but I don't want to really take too much of your time or
sure, well, we can do a few more, let's say five minutes.
Just maybe for 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, then I would...
it's not that stingy on my time, but I left my 98-year-old mother.
Yes, I know. And thank you for your flexibility with regards to that. So I would like to read then Lyudmila Gamayunova's question. What if attitude of benevolence or altruism is present, but behavior still remains unchanged? A good example is to love animals, but refusing to reduce meat consumption, going to circus, zoo, etc., which provokes unnecessary suffering of sentient beings. How to provoke this passage from abstract benevolence to behavioral engagement?
It means you don't love them enough. It's like you love them in theory. I mean, let me tell you a story that Jane Goodall told me, about a young nephew who was 4 years old. So first of all, he was given meat, and like in a city like Chicago, I mean, she's not from Chicago, but there was a study. More than half of the kids, when you ask them where the meat comes from, they say from supermarket. And say, but before that, well, it comes from the factory. Now, many children, and that was included Jane Goodall's nephew, when he was told that meat comes from living animals, he said, but I can't eat that. I love, cows and all that. How can I do? So he gave up. And then his mother said, well, you still eat fish. It's good for your health, which of course completely wrong from all studies. But anyway, so then he went to a big aquarium and he looked at very beautiful fish. And he said, Mommy, I cannot eat those. And so I said, okay. Then he went further down. There was very, very ugly fish. And it took some time. Look at the fish and said, Mommy, why should I eat this one even is ugly? So he stopped there. So I remember there was a school in Santiago de Chile called Francisco Varela School in honor of our dear friend Francisco. So there they asked me, the parents, they're big meat eaters, and they very imprudently asked me to speak to the kids. They didn't know what they were going to get. So at the end, I asked the kids, do you love cows? They say, yeah. No. Are cows your friends? They say, yes. Are birds your friends? Yes. Are fish your friends? Yes. Then they said, do you want to eat your friends? Silence. No. So all the parents were, damn what this monk is telling. So basically that's that. You just you just think more and then feel it. And I have a good friend who is a handicapped Swiss philosopher, very wonderful, Alexandre Jolien. We did a few dialogues together. And when we do talks together, he said, Matthieu is always telling me I should stop living on the death and suffering of others, but very hard to stop. So I tell myself I will eat less. But then he goes on. But that doesn't make sense. It's like saying, okay, I'm not going to stop killing people, but I'll just kill a little bit less. So basically, think about that. They are sentient beings. They have consciousness. They don't want to suffer. We use the law of the strongest, not anything else. It is no moral justification. It's just that we are smart enough to impose that on them. So please think about that. And then it's easy. No problem.
Thank you, Matthieu. And then the last one is, I try to simplify. It's Wolfgang Lucas' question. Thank you, Wolfgang, for raising it. He says that with altruism and compassion for others and ourselves, we still need to make agreements and reevaluate and renegotiate these agreements with each other. What practical, skillful means and methods do you suggest for this, above and beyond our shared intention of altruism and compassion? Or are such best practices still to be discovered and developed?
So I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you explicit that?
Do we have best practices, skillful means and methods? Where in the light of altruism and compassion for others, when we negotiate, renegotiate, or argue on certain agreements?
Oh, well, I mean, suppose there's two sides with altruistic intention, they will find what the dilemma called mutually agreeable solution. And then that's where cognitive empathy comes into place, putting yourself in others' shoes, exchanging yourself with others. I remember one of the most, and very, very few, unfortunately, successful meeting between, say, Palestinian and Israeli was when someone tried to make them just spend time, 3 days together in a place, and the negotiation or the talks were going to take place at the end. And then over 2 days, they saw that they have families, they have same concern, they have children, they have grandparents, they have this, they have that, they have aspiration in life, and so forth. So when you see that basically they are same human beings, and then you start to value, and then you start to be concerned. So if you value others and you genuinely, it's not that you become like a carpet that everybody can step on. So basically that non-violence and altruism is not weakness. It's not, because it's not useful to anyone to let others exploit you in a mean way. It doesn't help them because they become increasingly mean by being mean and practicing meanness. It doesn't help you because you are a silent victim. So you should stand your ground with dignity, but without the slightest trace of hatred and animosity. And then, if there's goodwill. I mean, I participated in an experiment on confrontation. Been confronted with very nice people and with very difficult people. And of course, you didn't tell them that they were selected because they were so difficult. And if you don't play the game, you need 2 hands to clap. You can't clap with 1 hand. Usually they measure the physiology, all kinds of electrodes and things like that. And then within 10 minutes, they they say themselves, I cannot fight with this guy. You know, he's sort of nice and smiling and telling reasonable things. So then everything sort of calms down. So you need two people to get a fight. And usually violence is an escalation, talk, 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 and then big fight. So at least, even if it doesn't work, you keep your own sort of integrity. And usually it will work. But if it doesn't work, at least one person has not fallen into hatred. So just have a right sense of fairness, but not aggressive fairness, sort of a kind fairness, but firm. There's no reason to be exploited. But then you have to also put yourself in others' shoes. So something like that. I mean, no magic bullet, I have no magic solution, but sort of basic things.
Thank you, Matthieu. I would really like to thank you for your dedication, for your commitment, for your service. There were so many messages in the chat thanking your lifetime service to the cause all over the world. I would really like to thank you.